Okay, so this is a look at the stamps issued by Italy during the period of transition from being a monarchy to being a republic. So that was at the end of World War II. The reason I got going on this was I flipped through my Italian albums from time to time. I really enjoy the stamps of Italy for a variety of reasons. One is that the country was formed in the philatelic era. That is to say, there are Italian states before there is Italy, much the way that Australia has its states, Canada has its provinces, Germany had its states, so on. And it's just an added thing. But I also liked this particular issue from autumn of 1946. It has sort of a photographic realism to it. I've owned these stamps for decades, and I never thought much about them. Just recently, I decided to find some context. Why did Italy issue these particular stamps? So, Italy was unified in the early 1860s. 1861 is generally the year people will cite. Uh, the King of Sardinia, Victor Emmanuel, of the House of Savoia, or House of Savoy, as we call it in English, was ruling in Sardinia. He also had territory on the peninsula itself. Uh, Gradually, various areas of Italy joined with him. He became the king of all Italy, with the exception of the papal states around Rome. They didn't join in, and they were forced to join, as opposed to many other areas of Italy. In 1870, I think. So you can see the similarity between the stamp on the left, which is a stamp from Sardinia, pre-Italian unification, and the two stamps on the right, which are from the first issue of the Italian stamps.
That's why the Italian listings start at number 7, I believe.
17, yes.
And
that's
the
right.
Indians are the first ones.
That's right. Scott doesn't give Italy a number 1 or even a number 16. Starts at 17, and it skips a few too. But that's precisely the case. Scott considered Italy to be a continuation of Sardinia. I don't think other catalogs do it that way, but be it as it may. You'll notice the great similarity in design of these two stamps, but I have a question. There is something that I find very striking about these stamps. It's the entity that will honor this stamp. Never is it mentioned in Sardinia that this is a Sardinian stamp, and never is it mentioned on the first issues of Italy that this is Italian postage. I mean, they are labeled francobollo, which means postage stamp, but you couldn't use it in Liverpool. You couldn't use it in Lima, Peru. Where do you use it? It was just understood by people that it was for Italy. This, of course, is way before the UPU conventions require stamps to be identified. So, like most countries that had a monarchy, the monarch made a regular appearance on the stamps. I should say mostly on the regular issues, which is 97% of all the stamps that are actually used in any country. To the left, we have a stamp from about 1900. The next one is about 1912. Then we move into the 20s. And you can see that the stamps get progressively less florid, less involved, less Victorian Georgian, if we to actually misuse those terms. And they become more like photographs of the individual. The one to the right looks very much like someone looking in the mirror, an actual person. This is Victor Emmanuel II. He was on the throne from 1900 till the monarchy was dissolved. And I could never do a presentation if I have any tabs like this, I've got to include them because I get a tremendous kick out of those stamps that come from booklets that have advertising tabs attached to them. The one to the right, of course, is Singer sewing machines.
Hmm.
The one to the left is Casali's syrup, which, according to the label, maybe Sam can correct me, combats and guards against arterial sclerosis, anemia, and general lassitude, diseases that are infectious, and this is the kicker, I love this one, diseases of the metabolism. Well, that pretty much says it all, right? One thing I like about these two little rascals is that, unlike most advertising uh, slogans and so on, that can be separated because they're perforated, as far as I know, when they appear in a booklet, these you had to use the advertisement or snip it off with the scissors. So
Yeah.
people didn't do it. They're attached. So you sent your letter out and you sent the ad out with it. Very clever idea. So the king got along just fine with the fascists who took over in the early 20s. That's Mussolini and his gang. And they made the king of Italy very proud because they went out and they fought one of the most unjust wars ever imaginable against Abyssinia. And then the king became king of Italy and also emperor of Abyssinia. Oh, he loved it. But he cozied up to Mussolini. It should be pointed out that, unlike other dictators at the time, Stalin and Hitler come to mind, who had absolute power, Mussolini was somewhat on a leash because he was the head of government, yes, but he was not the head of state. The king was the head of state and had great moral authority. He did not bother to use it, but too bad. So there's one word I want to keep everyone to keep in mind during this relatively short presentation, and that is the word propaganda. These stamps are obviously war propaganda, but we'll see other stamps that are propaganda, and the word doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation at all times. So here's the king on the stamps. These came out in 43, I'm sure it is, and they're trying to build up support. The war, of course, in Italy was extraordinarily unpopular. It was a disaster militarily, both in the air, at sea. The Italian Navy was obliterated virtually by the English in the Mediterranean. Toward the end of the war, what was left of the Navy sailed to Malta and surrendered to the British. The Allies chased the Germans and the Italians out of North Africa, out of Sicily, and up the Italian peninsula. As I said, Benito Mussolini was on a leash. There was something called, I'm not going to use the right word, a war commission. And they went to Mussolini and they said, look, let's sign an armistice. Let's get out of this war. We're getting nothing from it and we are being destroyed. And people are dying by the tens of thousands. Mussolini said no. He had to say no. The Germans would have chopped his head off instantly. The king actually jailed Mussolini, but Mussolini was able to get out of jails time and time again in his life, and he did this time. So the king removes Mussolini from office, and the first philatelic indication of this is an obscure little thing, the removal. I'll try to circle this with some dexterity here. The removal of, you see the fasces at the bottom of these regular issue stamps? Those are the ones that have been in circulation all through the 30s. And they have little tiny indication that Italy is a fascist country. They reprinted the stamps, but without the fasces. That's the first indication that something is changing in Italy. Mussolini goes north and he founds the Italian Social Republic under the aegis of the German army, of course. He's not a very popular guy at this point. Now, back to the word propaganda. What kind of stamps does the Italian Social Republic issue? They issue stamps depicting national treasures, buildings, and so on that have been destroyed by the Allies in their march up the peninsula, as if to say, look at how these people fight a war. They're barbarians. Incidentally, during the war, toward the end, many private mail services arose. And the Italians, they are so clever. My hat's off to them all the time. They compromised. The government was supposed to sell the stamps and deliver the mail, but they put up with these private carriers. All you had to do, however, was put the correct postage on your mail, thereby giving the Italian government what it wants. Then going to the private carriers, some of whom are shown here, and putting their stamps on it in the amount the private carriers issue. Then your mail was taken not by the government, so they loved it. They got money, but they didn't have to do any work, but by these people on bicycles who cycled all around northern Italy with the mail. The war ends, and a new issue of stamps is put out. Victor Emmanuel is still the king. It's still a monarchy in 1945, but the stamp issue doesn't include him anymore. Now it's allegorical, with a young family looking to the future, planting of new trees, crops, what have you, the torch of enlightenment being lit. And this one here and here, the very spirit of Italy rising up, the way that branches will still sometimes sprout from a blasted tree. So philatelically, you see that the change is in progress. Quickly through this political aspect of it, Victor Emmanuel realizes he's not going to stay on the throne. He abdicates, and his son becomes king of Italy for 1 month. This is in 1946. On the 2nd of June, which is Italy's national holiday, a referendum was held. Women were allowed to vote in a national election for the first time. The Republican side wins pretty overwhelmingly, 54% to 46%. And Italy is now a republic. They still have to put together a constitution, but the king is no longer recognized. The former king and the king for a month, reminds me of Queen for the Day, a little TV show, both left. There was one troubling aspect, and I'm getting back to propaganda again now, and that was the intractable split between northern Italy and southern Italy and Sicily. This apparently will never go away. Northern Italy voted for a republic. Southern Italy voted to retain the monarchy. This was very troubling to the people in power, the committees that were running the country while the Constitution was being cobbled together. So what did they do? Among other things, they issued this set of stamps again. This is propaganda, but in a positive sense. This issue shows the Italians, hey, don't worry about it. We've had republics before. We had republic in Amalfi, in Florence, in Genoa, in Venice, and so on. Now, were they really republics in the sense that we would use the word today, a large country with everyone of a certain age having the vote? No, they were more like oligarchies, but they called themselves republics. This issue celebrates Italy's republican history, and it's supposed to be a morale booster. And I think they're beautiful stamps in any case. Finally, last slide here. Every 10 years after 1946, on the 2nd of June, Italy would issue a series of stamps commemorating the declaration and the approval by referendum of the Republic. And as things developed and Italy became a very prosperous country by world standards, really a first world country, they were just so happy they had made this decision. So that's a little philatelic look at transition from Italy's monarchy to the Republic.